So it's about time that I play Silent Hill 3, and this game is amazing. So recently I've been getting into the Silent Hill franchise. I played Silent Hill 1 and thought it was mid. I played Silent Hill 2 and thought it was a bit better, but still mid. And most of that can be chalked up to the gameplay, atmosphere, and locations. So Silent Hill 1 and 2 are a masterclass in how to make some of the most boring and uninteresting places imaginable. The school in Silent Hill 1 nearly put me to sleep. The apartments in Silent Hill 2 had me yawning. The horror and atmosphere in these games didn't really do it for me either. But in my previous review, some kind folks mentioned that Silent Hill 3 is where it's at. Silent Hill 3 fixes all the sins of the past. Silent Hill 3 is better, and I must say that they were correct. After playing Silent Hill 3, I can confidently say that it is miles better than the previous two, in my opinion. Silent Hill 3 pretty much does everything better than the previous games. Once again, in my opinion, the combat now provides an actual challenge as opposed to the mindless combat in Silent Hill 1 and somewhat 2. The locations are actually enjoyable compared to the terribly mundane places like the school and apartments. Silent Hill 2 did have some pretty okay stuff though, like the prison, but still nothing compared to Silent Hill 3. I like the story in SH3 a lot more too, and I think it's because it's a lot more goofy, and it really plays into it, which I enjoy. I wasn't eager to start playing Silent Hill 3 after 2, but something is bringing me back to that town, and I have to know what it is. Silent Hill 3 takes place 17 years after the first game, and you play as Heather, the daughter of Harry. However, Heather is the reincarnation of Alessa from the first game, which gave birth to a god, so it only makes sense that the ops were going to come looking for her eventually. Harry tried to prevent it by changing her name, dyeing her hair, and of course, getting away from that town, but clearly not far enough. Hey, I'm just saying, me personally, I wouldn't stay anywhere near the same vicinity as Silent Hill if that happened to me. Harry should have moved states at least. Anyway, people start looking for Heather, strange stuff starts happening, weird monsters appear, and of course, we eventually end up back in Silent Hill to kill the god once and for all. The plot is definitely a little weird and convoluted, but this is Silent Hill, so a straightforward story just isn't in the books. Now, I could explain the plot more and go through it in detail, but I feel like it's best to do that through the characters. Every one of them was great in my opinion, easily some of the best written in the franchise so far. The voice acting is also majorly improved, which could be seen as a good and a bad thing. See, in the first two games, the bad voice acting ended up adding to the experience and created a big feeling of unease. However, Silent Hill 3 doesn't really do that as much, besides the fact that everyone just comes off as untrustworthy. Even Heather at times, and she's the main character. I don't really mind the voice acting being the way it is though. That doesn't really affect me either way. Getting back to the characters, we play as Heather, and as I said, she's the daughter of Harry Mason. Unfortunately, Harry is dead at the hands of Claudia, which is another character, and also serves as a big driving point for Heather on her quest for revenge. She's also pregnant with a god, just like in the first game, and this sort of serves as a commentary on unwanted pregnancy, which would be cool, but it's barely even realized until the last part of the game, so there's really not much commentary to be had. Heather is only 17 years old, and it really feels like it. Most media today cannot depict a proper teen for anything. Of course, this is due to higher ups being older men who are out of touch with society, but that's a topic for a different day. As I was saying though, Heather really feels like a teen. She's properly sarcastic, moody, actually questions what's going on, and is just overall a great character. She's by far my favorite protagonist out of SH1, 2, and 3. I mean, who doesn't love someone who says this after facing a giant, strange, delusional man?
Person here a mental case? Well, I guess you're not a person anyway.
Also, maybe I just feel this way because I'm also a teen, and she just relates to me more as opposed to someone like James, who is a odd, broken man that lost his wife. Douglas Carlin is a private investigator tasked with finding Heather. Needless to say, he succeeded, and it's the first other character we see. After Heather finds out her father is dead, Douglas starts to become that father figure for Heather. Heather and Douglas become really close, and you can see that Heather ends up really loving Douglas. Douglas shows the same love and helps out Heather a lot. He ends up breaking his leg in a face-off with Claudia though, which puts him out of commission for the rest of the game. Apparently he even had a son that robbed a bank, I guess. Overall, Douglas just feels like a really genuine guy, and he's my favorite character other than Heather. Vincent and Claudia are both really weird individuals. They're a part of all the cult stuff in Silent Hill, but have completely different views. Claudia wants to give birth to the god forming in Heather's body. Vincent doesn't, and instead opts to help Heather destroy Claudia. Of course, with this being a game, Vincent dies and Claudia succeeds in her plans. Only sort of though, because because Heather has the bright idea to swallow the strange gem that her father gave her when she was a kid right before the god came out, and for whatever reason, this makes her throw up the fetus. Yes, this makes her throw up the fetus. That's not even the worst part though, because Claudia, so determined to give birth to this thing, picks it up and swallows it to give birth to it herself. And y'all wonder why I like this story the best. This is comedy gold. Anyway, Claudia falls down a pit that looks like a vagina, which apparently might actually be intentional, but I didn't look into it. That causes her to die, and the god is born, and it looks like this. Heather, of course, gives it the work before returning back to Douglas, vowing to use her real name, Cheryl, from now on, which was the name given to her by Harry when she was originally a baby on the side of the road. You know, I don't make the rules here. As I mentioned, the story of Silent Hill 3 is a direct continuation of Silent Hill 1, so clearly that meant more of a focus on the cult stuff from Silent Hill 1 instead of the more darker psychological stuff from Silent Hill 2. Apparently, a lot of people didn't like this, but honestly, I quite enjoy it. As someone who wasn't really a fan of the darker tones of Silent Hill 2, I found the cult stuff a lot more interesting. This also just makes it a bit goofier, which I can appreciate. I mean, that's half the reason I love the Resident Evil franchise. Almost every plot in those games has some raunchiness to it that makes me laugh, and Silent Hill 3 does the same. I mean, the SH1 and 2 stories are great, don't get me wrong, but it's just I'd rather have something along the lines of Silent Hill 3. I'm sure a lot would disagree, but I simply don't care. This is the one that I like. To reflect on the characters, they're just so enjoyable to me. Heather, or Alessa, or Cheryl, or whatever the hell you want to call her, reminds me of sort of a young Jill Valentine. She's brave and witty, but has the added swagger of a white teen. Honestly, she'd be great as a Power Ranger. Douglas pretty much instantly replaces Harry as her father, but there's also something more to be said. When people lose someone, they often look for someone to latch onto, and Douglas was exactly that, a shoulder to cry on. Luckily, Douglas is also just a cool dude, so no harm done. Vincent and Claudia feel like brother and sister with how they bicker about the right thing to do, with Claudia being the more deranged of the two. That's enough with the story and characters though. It's time to talk about what really makes Silent Hill, which is Silent Hill, but I mean the atmosphere and locations. Now, for the previous two games, I've said I wasn't really a big fan of the locations, mainly because of how mundane they are. Of course, there is a couple of exceptions, but still. Silent Hill 3 for the most part completely reverses this for me. Almost every location is actually enjoyable. The mall you start in is cool to explore, the office buildings feel like a giant puzzle box, and I really like it. The amusement park is especially enjoyable with areas like the Haunted Mansion. The nightmare parts of the game are a lot better too in my opinion. It seems like they try to do a lot more with changing the area so it doesn't just feel like the same area twice. This can especially be felt in areas like the hospital. The game flows so much better too, and most of that can be credited to them cutting out about 3/4 of the running around Silent Hill that we usually have. I guess they finally realized that was the most boring part about the last games. In fact, the game doesn't even start in Silent Hill, which I love because I hate that damn town. Now, this does beg the question of how the mall turns into the nightmare realm, but Heather is a magical god, demon baby, or something, so nothing really makes sense anyway. My least favorite thing is probably that they reused the hospital from Silent Hill 2. I guess they found out that they still had the same assets and just threw that shit in there. I actually somehow missed the map for this area, but I didn't really mind because it was really enjoyable with the added mystery of not knowing where I was. Also, I think the alternate version of the hospital is actually more enjoyable to explore than the regular version. They could have easily reused the alternate version from Silent Hill 2 as well, but I really like the way they changed it here instead. To focus more on the atmosphere, once again, there's mainly just a whole bunch of dark areas, which is fine, I guess, but sometimes it just gets kind of annoying. Now, you could just turn up the brightness, but I'm no full brightness pussy, so I just dealt with it. However, I wouldn't be complaining if the game was just naturally a bit more light. One thing I also want to mention is that certain areas in the Nightmare Realm have this weird, almost melted effect to them, and I find it really cool. It sort of reminds me of old PS1 textures if they tried to mesh them together in the PS2. Not sure if there's any deeper meaning to it, but it's here. To get to the combat, it's really not that bad. Combat is typically the last thing Team Silent focuses on, but here they went all out. To be fair, they sort of just reused the Silent Hill 2 combat, but they added a whole bunch of weapons, so that's cool. I mean, you can get a SMG and just blast enemies, and I'm here for it. The melee stuff is fun too, like how you can get a katana or a maul. The enemies this time around are more aggressive too. In Silent Hill 2, each enemy had a different meaning and reflected on James's psyche. Silent Hill 3 sorta has that, like these things are supposed to be based off of fetuses apparently, but all the other enemies just feel like an obstacle. I'm sure there's deeper meanings for some of the other enemies, but I just can't be bothered to look into it, although I am curious what the dude with the giant nub hands are supposed to be. The bosses are definitely bosses. The only one really worth mentioning is Leonard, since he's an actual dude just chilling in the depths of the hospital. He's also Claudia's dad and is completely okay with us killing her. I'll talk about the final god boss fight too. They just decided to give this thing way too much health for what it's worth, and the damage it dishes out is insane. I might get some backlash for this, but I put that shit in beginner mode and killed it in 50 seconds seconds. And no, I have no shame. Well, it's about time I mentioned the most strategic part about Silent Hill. And geez, they do not hold back. On easy, the puzzles are easy, nothing really be said. On normal, the puzzles are a bit more challenging, and I was looking up the answers for a lot of them. But if you're playing with the puzzles on hard, then I hope you're a Harvard scholar. You have to have the smarts of Albert Einstein himself to solve some of these. I played on normal because I like to keep my sanity, but I feel bad for anyone who willingly chose hard. I mean, they got entire novels for some of the hard puzzles. At least the puzzles are hard though. Most games now, and even at the time, would hate to put a puzzle past the level of a 5th grader, so I can gladly compliment Team Silent on not holding back. Before I reach the conclusion of this video, I have to talk about one more thing: the soundtrack. Akira Yamaoka strikes again. He does not fail to make an amazing Silent Hill soundtrack. This time the soundtrack is a bit more rebellious and free, which matches with Heather completely. Lyrics are even incorporated this time, which kind of makes it feel like a teen movie, which overall just ends up adding to the charm of the game. I wouldn't fault anyone for saying the Silent Hill 2 soundtrack is better, and I'd even agree. But that doesn't mean that SH3's soundtrack doesn't completely knock it out of the park. And that's it. That's Silent Hill 3, and in my opinion, the best one I've played. Team Silent took a lot more risk with this game, and I think it completely paid off. The story was a bit more wacky, and the characters may not have been as deep, but I enjoyed that. SH3 ends up being a weird, wacky, nightmare-fueled adventure, and that's perfect. As perfect as this game is though, I have one question. Why the heck is Harry Mason still in the same clothes from Silent Hill 1?
You tried to tell me, a molecular nigga like myself, what you think I am.